Hello students, I am Dr. Rajaram Dhok from Savitribai Phule Pune University affiliated Agricultural Development Trust Shardabai Pawar Mahila College Sharda Nagar Baramati. Let's start. Ionic Solids Lecture 3. In this lecture, we learn fights in the close packed structure and polarization of ions. So firstly we see the what is meant by whites or holes in close packed structure. So we know that there are two types of closed packing: hexagonal closed packing and cubic closed packing arrangements. So such type of arrangements are observed in many crystals. In any layer of close packed arrangement of the spheres, in between the spheres there is some space, there is some unoccupied volume, and that unoccupied volume that is called as void or hole. So near about 26% of the space is unoccupied, and this unoccupied volume that is called as voids. So there are two types of voids or two types of holes in the crystal lattice depending upon their shape. The first type of void is tetrahedral void or hole, and second type of the hole is octahedral hole. So we see what is tetrahedral hole and octahedral hole. What is difference between that two? So these tetrahedral holes are surrounded by four spheres, and that four spheres are coordination number 4, and they are arranged in tetrahedral arrangement. This type of hole, when we show in the diagram, then you show here there is 3 ions are in the first layer is shown, and in between that 3 ions in the first layer, one ion when we keep exactly on the center of these 3 ions or at the base of these ions, then we get the hole, and that hole has shape like tetrahedral, and so this is the tetrahedral hole. Now in case of the octahedral hole, these holes are surrounded by 6 spheres. So you see, when we arrange the ions in the crystal lattice, then first 3 ions are placed in the one line, then the other ions are kept in between the 2 ions. So see, in the second layer the ion is placed in between the 2 ions. Again the second ion is in between the 2 ions, third ion is in between that 2 ions. So in this way, in the first layer 3 ions are placed, and in the second layer 3 ions are placed in between that holes. And now the center, or at the center, this hole is formed, and that hole is surrounded by these 6 ions. And when we see the shape of this hole, then that is like octahedral shape, and so that is called as octahedral hole. So in this way, here tetrahedral hole and octahedral holes are formed. So such type of tetrahedral holes and octahedral holes are formed when there is a close packing. Now, how many numbers of these tetrahedral and octahedral holes are formed? So generally, there are 2 tetrahedral holes and 1 octahedral holes. And these type of holes are sequentially carried out, that there is 2 tetrahedral and in between that 2 1 octahedral. So such type of octahedral holes and tetrahedral holes, when we see the shape or its volume, its size, then octahedral holes are larger in volume than the tetrahedral holes. The size of each hole that depends upon the size of the ions. When there is large size of ions, then there is larger size of the hole. When there is large size of that ions, then hole obtained or whites obtained is of larger size. When there is smaller size of the ions, then white formed in between that is also the small space. So ionic crystals are made up of oppositely charged ions. And if the larger ions are close packed, then smaller ions may occupy either the tetrahedral or octahedral holes. This depends upon the size of ions and the holes which is formed in between that. So the type of hole occupied by the ions depends upon the radius ratio. Therefore, an ion occupying a tetrahedral hole has a coordination number 4, while the ions occupying octahedral hole has a coordination number 6. Only in some compounds the relative size of ions are much that the cations are so large that they cannot fit into the holes. The forces of anions to go out the contact with each other and disturb the structure. Now we see the polarization of ions, and that polarization of ion is also called as Fajans rule. So the scientist Fajan gives a series of rules, and that rules are useful to predict the type of bonds that is formed between the atoms. The transition between ionic and covalent bonds are based on the concept of deformation or polarization. Usually, we know that anions are larger size and cations are smaller size. The distortion of electron cloud of one ion by the electron cloud of the other ion, that is called as polarization. So, when different ions come in contact with each other, then electrons of other ion may be polarized by the electron nucleus or positive charge of first ion. So in this case, portion of electron cloud of the anion is pulled towards the cation, and in that case distortion is increased. The bond between anion and cation takes more and more covalent character. So such type of cation and anion, when interact with each other, then there is formation of polarization and the covalent characters are increased, and that is explained by the Fajan. And such type of polarization is observed in the compounds. So when we take the simple example, we take two ions. One ion is positively charged, we say that is the X plus, other ion is negatively charged, that is the Y minus. And when these two ions come together to the equilibrium distance, then the type of bonds formed between that X and Y that depends on the effect of one ion on the other ion. So in between the X plus and Y minus, when they come together, then bond formed between it depends upon the two. So positive ions, means that is the cation, attracts the outer electron of the negative ion. And in this case, here at the same time, it extends to repels the positively charged nucleus of the anion. Means in this case, positive ion attracts the electron of negative ion, and this positive ion repels the positive charge of that anion. So this results into the distortion or polarization of negative ion. So in this case, here attraction of positive ion for the outer electron of the negative ion is quite small, then ionic bond is formed. If the attraction of positive ion for the outer electron of the negative ion is very large, then the electron of the negative ions are drawn close to the positive ion. And in this case, covalent bond is formed. And such type of polarization is observed, and that is known as polarization effect. We see here the diagram. Here, systematically representation of polarization of ion is shown. So here, this is larger size anion. This larger size is anion, and comparatively smaller size, that is the cation, that is shown by C plus. Ni is shown by A minus. Now, when that anion and cation come in contact with each other, then this cation attracts the electron of anion. But at the same time, this cation repels the positive charge of this anion. So here, in this anion, here electrons are attracted towards the cation, and that is called as polarization. And in that anion, here attraction towards the cation is formed, and such process, that is the polarization of ion. So generally, in between the cation and anion, cation polarizes anion. Cation polarizes anion. So we say that anions undergoes polarization because its size is larger. Now we learn about the factors affecting polarization. So when that polarization is formed, then which factors are responsible for this polarization? So this polarization affected by different factors, and in that one is size of cation or anion. Second factor is charge on the cation or anion. Third factor, electronic configuration of cation. So these are the three important factors. So this covalent bond is formed, and maximum covalent character is favored when there is small size of cation, large size of anion, and high charge on the cation or anion, or both cation and anion. Means simply, when there is more covalent character, then such type of covalent characters are observed in the compounds when there is small size of cation and large size of anion, and on the both higher charge is present. In that case, covalent character is more. And when size of the cation is larger size, size of the anion is a smaller size, and charge on that cation and anion is comparatively less, then covalent character is less and ionic characters are more. So this is the factors which affects on the polarization. So polarization of ion depends upon mainly size of ion and charge of ion.